Welcome back to Keeping Cyber Simple. Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about security policy. Cybersecurity policy. And you may ask, why is this important? Well, here's why. No matter what we do, like I say, should be rooted and grounded in policy. And many times we just want to dive into the middle of the pool and not understanding, like we talked about in a previous course, the why as opposed to just the how. So that's why we're going to spend a little time going through some of the NIST policies. Like I say, these are some of the policies we're going to talk about. We're in Module 2, Part 1, and after that, we're going to go into Part 2, where we actually talk about some roles and responsibilities. So some of the NIST policies we're going to talk about, this is not by any stretch of the imagination an exhaustive list of NIST policies. But these are some of the NIST, and NIST, by the way, if you're not familiar with them, they're the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's what NIST means. And so, like I say, these are some of the ones that we're going to talk about. All right, let's get into this. First one is NIST Special Publication. When you say the SP Special Publication 839. NIST 839, Managing Information System Risk. Now, really what this is guidance for how do you stand up a program within your organization and how you manage risk from an organizational perspective. Like I said, provides a structured yet flexible approach for managing risk that is intentionally broad-based with the specific details of assessing and responding to and monitoring risk on an ongoing basis provided by other supporting NIST security standards. So like I said, this is the overarching guidance for managing risk in your organization. Now, when we look at this, it breaks risk management or security risk management into three tiered areas. And this, if you notice, it's very similar to an earlier course that we taught at the beginning, our course overview. It starts at a strategic level and works down to an operational or tactical level. Tier 1, like I say, that is looking at risk from the entire organization. This is where you may work with your C-suite of people, the CIO, the CISO, the CEO of your organizations, and start understanding at the organizational level, what is the risk posture from a security perspective. Now, risk at Tier 2, this is where we start looking at mission and risk and business processes risk. So now we've gone from the strategic 2 to 10-year vision. Now we're getting into that 1 to 2 year of this is how we operate within our organization. These are the mission areas. These are the business areas as well as the business processes. So we understand now, we can start understanding the risk associated, the security risk associated with mission and business processes. And then when we actually get down to Tier 3, that is more at that operational level, the weeks, days, months, where we're actually working with the risk associated with our information systems themselves. So that's what 839. It gives you a very broad organizational wide perspective of how to run and manage security risk. Not only do we want to be able to manage risk, you also want to be able to conduct risk assessment. You want to be able to assess on your information systems, especially if you work within the federal environment or within the government. This is really a mandatory process of conducting risk assessments on your information systems. And this really partners with 839 on how to assess risk. So when we look at this, like I say, it takes this assessment process really in 4 steps. Step 1, prepare for an assessment. Like I say, and that is derived from your organizational risk framework, depending on what framework you may be using, whether it's an ISO and an ISO framework, it may be the risk management framework. It could be, several of the different frameworks that are out there that can be used to manage and assess risk. Step 2, that's when you conduct your assessment. You identify the threats and events, identify vulnerabilities, determine likelihood, determine the magnitude of impact, and from there you determine the risk. Now, that may sound very technical, but really it isn't. That's what we do every day in our everyday life when we assess risk. When we go to our homes, or you look at your automobile, like I said, you want to know, okay, what threats you want to move to a new neighborhood. What do most of us do? Okay, I want to know what threats. Am I living in the hood or am I living in a gated community? That's going to be a part of my risk assessment. Then I'm going to identify vulnerabilities. Okay, if I live on a corner lot, or I got a big field behind me, that's pretty could be conducive for somebody coming through, breaking in my house, and they got a quick escape route. Determine likelihood. So if I live in a gated community, the likelihood starts to decrease. Why? Because I have a gated community. And then I want to determine the magnitude. So if someone breaks into my house, or let's say just into my garage, what's the magnitude? Well, they may get a few tools and some other things that are sitting in the garage. And from there, we determine what the risk level. So you see what we do here really is in an organization is no different than how we manage risk in our own homes. That's how we try to keep things simple. So once you conduct the assessment, now this is where you want to try to start communicating the results internally to other throughout the organization, as well as you want to maintain that assessment. What do you mean by maintaining the assessment? That is where you be sure your assessment is documented also and it's repeatable. So that's what Special Publication 830, how to conduct a risk assessment. Now we've talked about these things. One of the things that we really have to look at within our organization is how do you put things in categories? And meaning what's important and what's not. That's what the 860 special publication helps us with. Mapping types of information to security categories. Because why? I mean, we can't protect everything at 100%. No. So we want to be sure that we are protecting the most critical things at the level that it needs to be protected. And to do that, we have to categorize where, what's important. Here again, no different than we do in our homes. And, things that are highly important, we categorize them and we probably put them in a safe. Things that that's less important, I may leave them setting out. Things that, well, if you get stolen, no big deal. Like a lawn furniture that's sitting on my front porch. If it gets stolen, no, well, I hate to see it go, but, it's not the end of the world. So mapping our information to security, information security types, very important. Because many times when we go into security, we're thinking that we are securing our servers and routers and switches and computers. No, what we are really securing is the information. It's always about the information. That's what we are securing. So we have to understand what is the important information and the critical information and where does it reside and how do we categorize it. Well, so we do that by first doing some type of identification. We're going to identify different types of information. Like I said, 860 helps walk us through that process of how to identify that. Then we select some type of provisional impact levels. Typically, our impact levels are going to be moderate, high, moderate, or low. Those would be the impact levels. And then we want to also, when we're looking at information types, we want to know what type of categorization do we want to use. In many cases, and within the realm of security, what do we use? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we take these two components, and that is how we start to categorize the level of information that we have. If it's in a category where confidentiality is very high, or we could have integrity could be moderate, and availability could be low. So that's how we can start coming up with categorizations of how to categorize information. Once we understand the categorization, now that helps us to understand how we want to protect our information system. If I am in an operational environment where maintaining the confidentiality of our information has been categorized at a high, then I'm going to be using a lot of cryptography, a lot of encryption, and those types of things. If I'm an organization where availability may be high, meaning that be sure that that information is available, then I'm going to have, real-time backups. I may have a hot site, a cold site. I may have, secondary storage locations so that if something fails, I've got, failover controls in place. Why? Because that information has to get there. So you see how the criticality of our information based on confidentiality, integrity, or availability now drives the complexity or the non-complexity of our information system. So we're not so much protecting the information system, we are really concerned, we should be concerned about the information that system is protecting. So when you crack open 860, and it's two volumes, volume 1 and a volume 2, this is what it's actually doing. It's showing us how to categorize our information based on criticality, okay? Now, we've done this. Now we want to start protecting our information and our information systems. This is where 853. Now, in the business that we do, this is kind of like our Bible. Because why? Because this is where we start getting security controls. A control, again, is something that we put in place, some type of mechanism that we put in place to help mitigate the likelihood of a threat or a threat agent exploiting a vulnerability and producing some type of impact. So now we have within this standard, there are over 900 different, actually more than that now, because I think they're adding some controls families with version 5. But this is just an idea of what it looks of controls. These are your control families: access control, awareness and training, auditing, and you see the list goes on and on. And within each of these, for instance, in the AC family, there's over 23 sub control families. And then within those sub controls, you have, a part 1, a A, B, and C of each sub control. So you see these controls go on and on and on. So this is the roll up of the higher level families. So if we want to place some type of controls from a physical or environmental perspective, we would go to the PE family, physical and environmental protection. Auditing, actually, how are we going to audit our systems to maintain accountability? We have AU controls to do that. So that's what 853, this is I will tell you, if you work in the realm of security, especially from a national or from a federal government perspective, you will definitely be involved with 853. So now that we know that we've categorized our information based on 860, we have selected controls to protect and mitigate risk to the information using 853. How do we know if those controls are actually working? Well, that's what 853A helps us to do. Assess controls. How do we assess security controls? Like I say, after we selected them, now how do we know that they actually work? And to me, the assessment process is by far one of the most critical processes within our risk management framework of what we do. Let me give you an example. I'm sure many of us have probably changed a lock on our doors. Let's say you buy a new home, and first thing many times we want to do, especially if it's a older home, if somebody's lived there before, you're going to change all the locks on all the doors. Well, okay, when you do that, what do? You go to Home Depot, or you go to Lowe's, or wherever you shop, and you buy new locks. And if you've installed that lock, you've just selected and implemented a control. Okay, I put the new handle with the deadbolt on. What is the first thing? Now, I think this is international across every country that anybody does when you install a new lock. You grab that lock, you shake it 5 times, and you pull it. You've just done an assessment. You've just made an assessment that, yes, this control that I have put in place is actually working because the door is locked and I can't get in. And many times we'll go on the outside and be sure that handle is locked, trying to push it in and out. So you've just assessed a control. So 853 was where you selected a control. 853A is where you do the assessment. Now, when we do assessments, like I say, you pick a control, any control, and you want to assess every aspect of that control. And that's what 853A helps us do. So if we look at a control like this, AU12, which is an auditing control, you see there's 3 parts to this control: an A, a B, a C. So when we set up our assessment plan, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure we assess AU12A, AU12B, and AU12C. No different than we do when we put on a door lock, right? We could have put on the door lock and the deadbolt. So that means that there are 2 parts to that control. So I want to be sure I assess both the door handle lock and the deadbolt lock. 853A, assessing controls. That's what helps you get through that assessment process. Now that we've categorized, we've selected, now what we want to do, we want to be sure that we continuously monitor. Using that same analogy, right? So I've just put a new lock on my door. I did the assessment. How? I did the international, shake it 5 times, and turn it back and forth to be sure it's locked. Well, that's all well and good. However, what do we also do typically, right? Every night before we go to bed, what do you want to do? If your husband, wife, or significant other, they look at you, did you check the locks? And you go, what, babe? Did you check the door? Be sure it's locked. And you go, okay. Yes, you continuously monitor that door lock to be sure that it's locked. You'll get up and walk over, say, okay, yeah, I locked it, and then we go to bed. That is continuous monitoring, not to be confused with the initial assessment, because you may walk up there one day and you do your continuous monitoring and you see that you pull it and the door opens. Why? Because your house just shifted and the little strike plate have moved and now it's not catching anymore. So during the continuous monitoring process, you notice that your lock isn't working. Now we have issues and we got to figure out another way to keep in the door locked until we get it fixed. 137. That's the continuous monitoring process. That's how it shows us how to develop an information system continuous monitoring, ISCM continuous monitoring program. But yeah, so 853 helps you with that. So you see all of these things really fit together, from understanding risk, how do we assess risk in our organization, how do we assess our information, and how do we bring those pieces together to select controls, assess those controls, continuously monitor those controls. And what culminates that brings it all together is our NIST special publication 837. Yes, this is the risk management framework. Now, like I say, there are a lot of frameworks out there. ISO 27001, PCI DSS, you go on, many frameworks. And each of these different frameworks we have, they all have their own type of guidance and policies. But what you'll notice, there's a single thread across, no matter what framework, COBIT you may be using. They all follow the same basic process. Recognize the risk in your organization, know how to assess that risk, categorize your information, and then know how to select controls to protect that information. Then you do some type of assessment to be sure those controls are working, and then there's some type of continuous monitoring. So no matter what framework, you may work in a financial industry, you may work in the credit card industry, you may work with security for Home Depot, or you could be in the federal government. The underlying processes doesn't change. It's just like the door lock in your house. Security doesn't change. Nothing new under the sun, right? Remember that. So 837, this specifically talks about the risk management framework. And within that framework, there are six steps that we follow. And we have already basically talked about these steps already. How we do categorization, how we select controls, we implement those controls, we assess them, shake that lock to be sure they work. We authorize it. How do we authorize that door lock? Once I do that, I'll look at my wife and say, babe, the door lock works. We can go sleep in peace tonight because our house is secure. Because I put a $47 door lock on there from Home Depot and nobody will ever get into my fortress. Right. Did you check the window? Oh. So we've authorized it. And now we go into monitoring, continuous monitoring. So you see that this NIST framework, this risk management framework is a continuum because you're constantly monitoring. Now, if I find something has changed, I may have to recategorize, reselect, re-implement, reassess, and reauthorize. All right, so we've covered, I can say, some of the core NIST the NIST special publications. So hopefully this gives you an idea, no matter where you work, to look for the simplicity that undergirds whatever framework you may be under. All right, we got from here. Hopefully you'll join us on our next course, our next lesson, which is going to get into some cybersecurity roles and responsibilities. See you there.